The farmer vanishes without a trace, and just when all seems lost, a gifted child and an unlikely dog embark on a journey that will challenge the silence of the forest and the secrets buried in time. The sun rose behind the Appalachian Mountains, bathing the clay rooftops of Pinecrest Valley with its golden light. On a hilltop, surrounded by centuries-old trees, stood Ethan Walker's modest house. At 53, Ethan woke with the first rays of sunlight, a routine he had maintained for as long as he could remember. Deaf since childhood, he had developed an almost supernatural connection with the land and its cycles. That morning, as usual, Rusty, his faithful companion, waited. At the foot of the bed, the dog, a rare hybrid with traits of a red wolf, had amber eyes that seemed to understand every gesture of his owner. Ethan smiled and made a sign with his hands, his preferred form of communication. "Good morning, friend. Let's see how our plants are doing today." Together, man and dog descended to the wooden porch, where little Clara, 6 years old, was already playing with a cloth doll. The girl raised her brown eyes, identical to her mother's, and smiled when she saw her father. She ran to hug him with the pure spontaneity of childhood. "Dad, the trees are singing today. I heard them when I woke up," she said, moving her delicate little hands in signs she had learned to communicate with her father. Ethan nodded, affectionately touching his daughter's black, curly hair. Many in the village considered Clara's statements about hearing trees or understanding animals strange, but to him it made perfect sense. The connection he himself felt with nature seemed even stronger in his daughter. "Is Mrs. Mitchell here yet?" Ethan signed. Clara pointed to the trail that climbed up from the village. An elderly woman with grey hair and skin marked by time walked slowly, supported by a carved wooden cane. Mrs. Mitchell, the community elder, had been taking care of Clara while Ethan worked on the farm since Elena's passing 3 years ago. "Good. Morning, Mr. Walker," the lady greeted, her voice hoarse and measured. "Have you heard the news? A man from the big city arrived yesterday. Says he has big plans for our village." Ethan frowned. News rarely meant good things for people like him, who valued simplicity and tradition. He gestured for Mrs. Mitchell to come in and take care of Clara while he headed to the fields. The morning progressed like so many others, with Ethan meticulously tending to each garden bed. His farm, though small, produced the best fruits and vegetables in the region. There was a secret in his touch, the villagers said. The plants seemed to respond to his presence, growing more vibrant and healthy than anywhere else. Around noon, Ethan noticed unusual activity on the main road. 3 large, gleaming black cars, at odds with the rural landscape, approached his property. Rusty barked, restless. There was something about the vehicles that made him uncomfortable. From the first car emerged a tall man in an impeccable suit and imposing posture. Arthur Crawford, as he would introduce himself minutes later, smiled with perfectly aligned teeth and extended his hand. Behind him, other men in suits carried briefcases and sophisticated equipment. "Mr. Walker, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," said Arthur, not realizing that Ethan couldn't hear him. Mrs. Mitchell, who was watching from the porch with Clara, hurried down to mediate the encounter. "Mr. Walker has been deaf since childhood," she explained. "I can translate what you want to say." Arthur seemed momentarily disconcerted, but quickly regained his confident demeanor. Through Mrs. Mitchell, he explained his intentions: a luxury eco-resort high in the mountains, with stunning views and total integration with nature. Part of the land he wanted, however, belonged to Ethan. "I'm willing to pay very well," he stated, while one of his assistants opened a folder with documents and a check filled out with a considerable amount. Ethan observed the papers, then raised his eyes to the expanse of his land, to the trees he himself had planted, to the stream that cut through the property. Finally, he looked at Clara, who was playing with Rusty under the shade of a century-old black cherry tree. His response was a simple but unequivocal gesture. He shook his head negatively. Arthur Crawford was not accustomed to hearing no. His smile faltered for only a second before recovering. "Think carefully, Mr. Walker. This is a unique opportunity. Your piece of land is worth a lot, but not as much as I'm offering." Ethan remained firm. Through gestures translated by Mrs. Mitchell, he explained that the land was not for sale. It was his heritage, his home, his legacy for Clara. When the visitors finally departed, Ethan felt a strange tightness in his chest. Rusty approached, pressing his muzzle against his hand, as if he too sensed something. On the horizon, dark clouds began to form, announcing a storm. That night, in the small room lit by an oil lamp, Ethan watched Clara fall asleep. The girl had made a strange drawing before going to bed, spirals and lines that resembled underground paths, with small golden lights scattered across the paper. In the center, a figure that looked like a man lying under roots. "It's the forest protector," she had explained before falling asleep. "He showed me in dreams." Ethan put the drawing in the dresser drawer. Outside, the rain began to fall, and with it, an uneasiness that he couldn't explain. Something was about to change in the quiet Pinecrest Valley. The news of Arthur Crawford's arrival spread through Pinecrest Valley like wildfire in dry straw. The morning after his visit to Ethan's farm, the businessman organized a meeting in the small community hall, where he presented his ambitious project with digital images projected on a white screen. "Imagine," he said, with his deep, well-articulated voice, "tourists from all over the world coming to see our mountains, our culture. Jobs for everyone, development, prosperity." The villagers' eyes sparkled at the promises. Pinecrest Valley had always been forgotten by government officials, a place where progress arrived at a slow pace. The opportunity seemed unique, almost miraculous. "What about Mr. Walker's land?" asked John Peterson, owner of the village's only small market. "We all know he won't sell." Arthur maintained his confident smile, adjusting his tie knot with agile fingers. "We're in negotiations. I'm sure we'll reach an agreement that benefits everyone." Mrs. Mitchell, seated at the back of the hall, observed everything with suspicious eyes. She knew human nature too well to believe in miracles in suits. In the straw bag she carried was one of Clara's drawings, that same one with spirals and underground paths. Something about it deeply troubled her. While the meeting continued, Ethan worked in his garden, oblivious to the discussions. Clara played nearby, building small towers with colored stones she collected. Suddenly the girl stopped, as if listening to something distant. "Dad," she signaled, running to Ethan. "The trees are different today. They're talking very quickly." Ethan looked around. At first he noticed nothing unusual, but then he realized the leaves of the trees closest to the boundary of his property were slightly yellowed, as if autumn had arrived prematurely just there. He approached to examine more closely and noticed a strange chemical odor coming from the soil. Rusty, who was sniffing nearby, began to bark at the bushes. His fur was bristling, and there was an unusual tension in his posture. Ethan made a gesture for the dog to calm down, but Rusty continued, increasingly agitated. Clara approached the animal and placed her hand on his back. "He's seeing shadows in the bushes, Dad. Shadows that shouldn't be there." Ethan's expression hardened. He took a shovel and began to dig where Rusty was barking. A few centimeters deep, he found something. A small metal device with a blinking red light. Next to it, an empty vial with residue of a colorless liquid. Ethan didn't need to hear to understand what was happening. Someone was poisoning his land. Instantly, the meeting ended with enthusiastic applause. Arthur Crawford had won the trust of most residents. Only Mrs. Mitchell left in silence, her heart heavy with unspoken concerns. On the way home, she passed by the small local chapel and lit a candle. "May the guardians protect us," murmured the elderly woman, repeating an ancient prayer she had learned from her grandmother. 3 days passed. On the morning of the 4th day, something unusual happened. The machines arrived at the village. Excavators, tractors, trucks, an impressive fleet that set up on a lot near the center of the community. Uniformed workers set up tents and a temporary office. Everything seemed too organized and efficient for a project that didn't yet have all the necessary authorizations. That same afternoon, Arthur Crawford appeared again at Ethan's farm. This time he came alone, without assistance or paperwork. Mrs. Mitchell was there, as always, taking care of Clara. "I've come to make one last offer," said Arthur while Mrs. Mitchell translated into signs. I've doubled the amount. It's more than fair. Ethan stared at him for a long time before responding. In his hands, calloused from work, he held the device and the vial he had found on his property. "Is this yours?" he signed, extending the objects. The businessman paled slightly but recovered quickly. "I have no idea what that is," he replied with a studied calm. "But it looks dangerous. Perhaps it's one more reason to consider my offer. This place is becoming unstable." The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes sparking with indignation. He didn't need words or signs to express what he felt. Rusty, by his side, growled softly. "I think it's time to leave," intervened Mrs. Mitchell, her voice firm despite her advanced age. "Mr. Walker has made his decision." When Arthur left, there was a palpable tension in the air. Clara, who had observed everything from the porch, ran to hug her father. Her little eyes were teary, as if she understood the gravity of the situation, even at such a young age. "Everything will be okay, Dad," she signed. "The Guardians won't let anything bad happen." Ethan smiled, trying to reassure her, but deep down he felt a growing fear, not for himself, but for his daughter and for the future of the land he loved so much. That night, after putting Clara to bed, Ethan went for a walk around his property. The full moon illuminated the path, eliminating the need for flashlights. Rusty followed him faithfully. They reached the boundaries of Pine Ridge Reserve, a preservation area that bordered his lands. There, under the silver moonlight, Ethan closed his eyes and rested his hand on the trunk of a centuries-old tree. He couldn't hear, but he could feel, and what he felt coming from the forest was a growing restlessness, as if nature itself sensed an imminent danger. When he opened his eyes again for a brief moment, he had the impression of seeing golden lights flickering among the trees, similar to those Clara had drawn. He blinked, confused, and the lights disappeared. Perhaps it was just a reflection of moonlight on dew-moistened leaves, or perhaps, thought Ethan, it was something more. The next morning, upon waking with the first rays of sun, Ethan noticed that Rusty wasn't in his usual place. He called the dog with a silent whistle, an automatic gesture despite his deafness. There was no response. Worried, he got up quickly and discovered something even more alarming. Clara was not in her bed either. A note, written in the girl's childish handwriting, had been left on the pillow. "I went to show Rusty where the Guardians live. Be back soon." Despair took hold of Ethan as he read Clara's note. He rushed out, searching every inch of his property, calling for his daughter with gestures and anguished expressions. His search soon attracted the attention of neighbors, who joined the effort. Mrs. Mitchell, upon being informed, visibly paled. "The Guardians," she murmured, clutching to her chest a necklace of colored stones she always carried. She talked about the Guardians. "What are these Guardians that you keep mentioning?" asked Jack, one of the younger residents helping with the search. Mrs. Mitchell hesitated before answering. These were ancient stories passed down through generations that few still took seriously. "They are the protectors of the forest, the waters, everything that lives in Pine Ridge Reserve," she finally explained. "They say they've existed since the first man set foot on these lands, entities neither human nor animal, that maintain the natural balance." Jack couldn't hide his skepticism with a disguised smile, but he respected the elder too much to question her openly. The search continued. After hours of fruitless searching, the sky began to darken. A dense and unusual fog descended from the mountains, making visibility difficult. That's when they heard a distant bark. Rusty appeared at the edge of the forest, alone, with his fur soaked and full of leaves. Upon seeing Ethan, the dog ran in his direction, barking insistently as if trying to communicate something urgent. "Where is Clara?" Ethan asked in signs, knowing the animal wouldn't respond in the same way but hoping for some reaction. Rusty seemed agitated, running in circles and then pointing to the dense woods. There was something strange about his behavior, even more than usual. His eyes seemed almost human in their expressiveness and desperation. Ethan didn't hesitate. He took a flashlight and prepared to enter the forest, following the dog. Mrs. Mitchell held his arm. "Not now," she signed, her fingers trembling with age. "The night in the forest is dangerous, especially with this fog. The paths get confused, voices deceive. At dawn, we'll have better chances." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. He knew the elder was right. The forest of Pine Ridge Reserve was treacherous even during the day, with trails that seemed to change places and cliffs hidden among the dense vegetation. At night, with fog, it would be almost suicidal. He returned home with a heavy heart. Rusty refused to enter, remaining on the porch, his eyes fixed in the direction of the forest. Ethan spent the night awake, watching through the window, hoping that by some miracle, his daughter would return. In the early morning, when the sky was still dark but the fog had dissipated a bit, Ethan couldn't bear to wait any longer. He took his backpack, filled it with provisions, a flashlight, and a small first aid kit. He called Rusty, and together they left silently. The forest seemed different that early morning. The trees, normally welcoming, cast threatening shadows. The air was laden with a strange metallic odor that Ethan had never smelled before. Rusty led the way, his nose to the ground, following a trail that only he could perceive. After almost an hour of walking, they reached a clearing that Ethan didn't recognize. In the center, ancient stones formed a semicircle, covered with moss and marks that looked like symbols worn by time. The ground around had been recently disturbed, as if someone or something had dug there. Rusty began to dig frantically at a specific point. Ethan approached and helped, using his hands. Soon they found something, a stone medallion attached to a vine. The piece, greenish with age, had engravings similar to the drawings Clara made. Upon touching the medallion, Ethan felt a strange vibration, as if the object pulsed. Rusty suddenly barked, his fur bristling, looking into the darkness beyond the clearing. Ethan turned, trying to see what had disturbed the animal. For a moment, he had the impression of seeing silhouettes moving among the trees, and small, golden lights floating like fireflies. He blinked, and everything disappeared. The sun was beginning to rise when Ethan, exhausted and frustrated at finding no further sign of Clara, decided to return. He stored the medallion in his pocket and made his way back, marking trees with his pocket knife to be able to return later. Rusty seemed reluctant to leave the clearing, but finally followed his owner. When they arrived at the farm, they found Mrs. Mitchell on the porch, her face tense with concern. She wasn't alone. 2 police officers from the nearest town were talking to her, taking notes. "Thank God, Mr. Walker," exclaimed one of them upon seeing Ethan. "We were worried that you had disappeared as well." Mrs. Mitchell explained in signs that she had called the police at dawn, concerned about Clara's disappearance, and later upon realizing that Ethan was also not at home. The officers asked several questions, which Mrs. Mitchell patiently translated. Ethan showed Clara's note and described where he had searched. He didn't mention the medallion or the lights he thought he had seen. Something told him that certain things would not be understood or taken seriously. "We'll organize a broader search," said the older officer, putting away his notebook. "The forest is large, but with tracking dogs and experienced teams, we have good chances of finding her quickly." But there was something in his tone that wasn't convincing. Pine Ridge Reserve was known for its mysteries. It wouldn't be the first time someone disappeared there, only to reappear days later, disoriented and unable to explain where they had been. After the officers left, promising to return with reinforcements, Ethan sat heavily in the porch chair. The medallion seemed to burn in his pocket. He took it out and showed it to Mrs. Mitchell. "I found this in the forest," he signed, "in a clearing with ancient stones." The elder took the object with trembling hands. Her eyes widened in recognition. "It's the symbol of the Guardians," she said, her voice low as if afraid of being heard. "My grandmother had an identical drawing in an old book. She said it was the key to communicating with the forest protectors." Ethan looked toward the distant reserve, thoughtful. At that moment, Rusty, who had been restless since they returned, began to howl in a strange way, a high-pitched and continuous sound that almost seemed like a human lament. Meanwhile, in the village, the news of Clara's disappearance spread rapidly. Arthur Crawford, upon being informed, showed great concern, offering resources from his company to help with the search. "I insist on helping," he told the gathered residents. "I know rescue specialists who can be here by tomorrow." His apparent generosity impressed everyone. Only Jack, who had helped in the initial search, noticed a curious detail. While speaking, Arthur couldn't stop spinning a gold ring on his finger, a nervous movement that contrasted with his serene expression. At the farm, Ethan couldn't rest. The medallion, now hanging around his neck, seemed to grow increasingly warm. He decided he wouldn't wait for the police or Arthur's specialists. With every passing minute, Clara could be getting further away, lost in the vastness of Pine Ridge Reserve. When night fell again, he was preparing for a new incursion into the forest. This time, however, something inexplicable happened. As he was about to step outside, a familiar childish voice came from behind him. "Dad?" Ethan turned, astonished. Clara was standing in the living room, with Rusty by her side, as if she had never left. Her eyes, however, had a different glow, almost golden under the oil lamp's light. Ethan couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Clara was there before him, as if the last 24 hours of anguish had never existed. He ran to hug her, silent tears streaming down his face, marked by time and worry. "Where have you been?" he signed, his hands trembling with emotion. "We looked everywhere." Clara smiled, a serene smile that seemed out of place on her small, childish face. "With the Guardians, Dad," she answered in precise signs. "They showed me secrets." Rusty, sitting beside the girl, maintained a strangely solemn posture. His amber eyes, fixed on Ethan, seemed to transmit a silent message. The medallion on the farmer's chest pulsed more strongly, as if in response to his daughter's presence. Mrs. Mitchell arrived minutes later, alerted by a neighbor who had seen lights on in Ethan's house. Upon seeing Clara, the elder fell to her, Hunhee's murmuring prayers of gratitude. Then, with her composure recovered, she carefully observed the girl. "You're different, little one," she commented, noticing the golden glow that occasionally sparkled in the child's eyes. Clara nodded, as if she perfectly understood what the old woman meant. "They gave me a gift," explained the girl. "I can see what others can't see now, and I can hear the earth breathe." Mrs. Mitchell exchanged a significant look with Ethan. There was an ancient belief in the region, a story passed down from generation to generation, about children chosen by the forest guardians. Children who returned with special gifts, able to communicate with nature in ways that adults would never understand. "What else can you tell us, Clara?" asked Mrs. Mitchell, her voice soft but urgent. The girl approached the medallion that Ethan was carrying and touched it with her fingertips. "This belongs to them. It's a key. It opens paths that shouldn't be opened." "And what paths are those, my dear?" insisted Mrs. Mitchell, while translating for Ethan. Clara hesitated, as if listening to instructions that only she could hear. "I can't tell everything yet, but something wrong is happening in the forest, something that shouldn't be there. The Guardians are restless." That night, after finally managing to get Clara to sleep, Ethan and Mrs. Mitchell talked on the porch. The story that the girl had told was fragmented, full of fantastic elements that would seem like childish delusions to anyone who didn't know the local legends. She had spoken of bright beings that lived under the roots of the oldest trees, of tunnels that led to the heart of the mountain, and of a growing danger that threatened the balance of everything. She mentioned the man who speaks with a sweet voice but has bitter thoughts, remembered Mrs. Mitchell, frowning. Who could that be? Ethan had no doubts. In his gestures he described Arthur Crawford, the businessman who so insisted on buying his lands. But what could he be doing that would disturb even the Guardians? Asked Mrs. Mitchell, more to herself than to Ethan. The answer would come sooner than they expected. The next morning, while Ethan worked in the garden with Clara by his side, a roar of engines broke the peace of the farm. 3 large trucks parked on the main road, loaded with heavy machinery. Uniformed men began to unload excavation and measurement equipment. Ethan approached quickly, signaling for Clara to stay near the house with Rusty. One of the workers, noticing his approach, called someone on the radio. Minutes later, Arthur Crawford appeared, impeccable as always in his tailored suit, despite the growing heat. "Mr. Walker," he greeted, as if they were old friends. "I'm glad you're here. I really wanted to talk to you." Mrs. Mitchell, who had arrived to take care of Clara, approached to translate. Arthur explained, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, that he had obtained authorization from the state government to begin preliminary works for the resort. Part of the project included an access road that would pass near Ethan's lands. "We're not invading your property, don't worry," assured the businessman. "The road will pass 200 meters from your boundary, totally legal." Ethan observed the maps that Arthur showed with growing distrust. The planned road would cut through an area that, although not officially his, was part of the buffer zone of Pine Ridge Reserve, crucial for the balance of the local ecosystem. "You can't do this," he signed, his expression more eloquent than any word. "You're going to destroy important springs." Arthur shrugged, his smile now less convincing. "All environmental licenses were obtained, Mr. Walker. The impact will be minimal, I guarantee. And think of the benefits. The village will finally have a decent road, tourists will come there. Will be jobs for everyone." The confrontation was interrupted by a sharp scream. Everyone turned to see Clara, who had disobeyed and approached without being noticed. The girl was pointing at one of the trucks, her eyes wide with horror. "What are they carrying?" she asked in quick, agitated signs. Ethan followed his daughter's gaze. In the last truck, partially covered by tarps, there were large metal containers with chemical hazard symbols. Arthur quickly made a gesture for the workers to better cover the cargo. "Just construction materials, little one," he said, bending down to be at eye level with Clara. "Nothing to worry about." The girl backed away, as if the man emitted some kind of repulsive energy. Her eyes, for a brief moment, sparkled with that strange golden glow. Arthur noticed and frowned, confused. "Your daughter has very peculiar eyes," he commented, turning to Ethan. "Family inheritance." Before Ethan could respond, Rusty burst across the yard, barking furiously at Arthur. The businessman backed away, visibly uncomfortable with the animal's presence. "Control. That dog, please," he asked, nervously adjusting his tie. The confrontation ended in a stalemate. Arthur left with his men, promising to return the next day to begin the works. Ethan stood watching the trucks move away, a feeling of helplessness growing in his chest. That afternoon, something strange began to happen in the vicinity of the farm. The trees closest to the road where the trucks had passed began to visibly wither, their leaves yellowing and falling as if autumn had arrived months early. The air became heavy, laden with a metallic odor that irritated the throat. Clara spent hours sitting under a century-old black cherry tree, her eyes closed, her little hands resting on the trunk, as if listening to something. When she finally stood up, her childish face was serious, almost adult in its expression. "The guardians are afraid," she said to Mrs. Mitchell and Ethan. "The man with the false smile is hurting the land. He's looking for something he shouldn't." "Find? What is he looking for, my angel?" asked Mrs. Mitchell, stroking the girl's hair. Clara hesitated, looking at Rusty as if seeking confirmation. The dog approached and pressed his muzzle against her hand in an almost human gesture of comfort. "The heart of the mountain," she finally answered, "an ancient stone that shines with its own light. The guardians have protected it for millennia. If he finds it and takes it away, everything will change. The forest will get sick, the waters will dry up." Ethan and Mrs. Mitchell exchanged worried looks. It seemed like childish fantasy, but recent events, Clara's strange behavior, the withering trees, the mysterious medallion, all pointed to something beyond common understanding. "We need to—" "Stop him," signed Ethan, his determination evident in every gesture. "How?" questioned Mrs. Mitchell. "He has money, influence, official authorizations." The answer came from Clara, who was now playing with the medallion that Ethan still wore around his neck. "The guardians will show us the way, but we need to act fast, before he reaches the place where the earth breathes." That night, after tea, Clara fell asleep. Ethan went out for his usual walk around the property. The moon was full again, bathing the landscape with its silver light. Reaching the limits of his land, where he could see the recent markings made by Arthur's team, he suddenly stopped. Golden lights, similar to those he had seen in the forest, danced in the air. They weren't fireflies or reflections. They moved with purpose, forming patterns that resembled Clara's drawings, and in the center of them, a translucent figure seemed to gesture, calling him. Rusty, who had silently followed him, advanced toward the lights without fear. Ethan, after a moment of hesitation, did the same. The lights moved away, entering the forest, clearly indicating a path. The medallion on his chest vibrated intensely, almost painfully hot against his skin. That's when Ethan understood. It wasn't just a story. The Guardians were real, and they were asking for his help. The morning dawned in Pinecrest Valley with an abnormally dark sky. Dense, almost black clouds hovered over the mountains, contrasting with the intense and stifling heat. The oldest residents commented that they had never seen such weather, not even during the worst summer storms. Ethan woke up with a strange sensation in his chest. The previous night's experience, the golden lights, the translucent figure in the forest, now seemed like a distant dream. But the medallion still hanging around his neck, warm to the touch, confirmed that it had all been real. Clara was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table drawing intensely. Her new drawings were different, more precise, almost like maps. Curved lines represented the contour of the mountains, spirals indicated specific locations in the forest, and in the center of it all, a bright oval shape, the heart of the mountain, Ethan supposed. He's going to start digging today. Digging, Clara signed, without raising her eyes from the paper. They're afraid. Before Ethan could ask who was afraid, they heard the roar of engines. Through the window, they saw a procession of vehicles climbing the road toward the area marked out the day before. Among them, a large yellow excavator, whose metal claws gleamed threateningly under the dark sky. Mrs. Mitchell arrived shortly after, breathless from the steep climb. The whole village is in an uproar, she reported. Half are celebrating the progress that Arthur promises, the other half are worried about the impacts, and there have been those strange tremors since last night. Tremors? Signed Ethan, surprised. Small, almost imperceptible, as if the earth were restless. Clara suddenly stood up, her drawing complete. Instead of showing it to the adults, she carefully folded it and put it in the pocket of her little blue dress. We need to go to the clearing with the ancient stones, she signed urgently. Now, before they start digging. Ethan hesitated. The idea of taking his daughter into the forest, especially with the threatening weather, didn't please him, but there was something in the determination of Clara's gaze that didn't allow for questions. This was no longer just his 6-year-old daughter. It was something more, something deeply connected to forces that he was only beginning to understand. I'll go with you, decided Mrs. Mitchell, as if reading his thoughts. I know the ancient paths better than anyone. In minutes they were ready. Ethan carried a backpack with water, food, and a first aid kit. Mrs. Mitchell brought dried herbs in a woven cloth bag. Clara, surprisingly, didn't want to bring anything other than the folded drawing in her pocket. Rusty led the group, his behavior more alert than ever. As they moved away from the farm, they could hear the distant sound of machines beginning. Their destructive work, a metallic, aggressive sound that seemed to hurt the very air. Clara visibly shuddered with each impact. The path through the forest wasn't easy. The vegetation seemed denser than normal. Low branches blocked the passage, like extended arms trying to prevent them from proceeding. Even Rusty, normally agile, found difficulties. The forest is confused, explained Clara in signs. It doesn't know if we are friends or enemies. Mrs. Mitchell took a small handful of dried leaves from her bag and scattered them around, murmuring words in the ancient language of the region. Almost immediately, the vegetation seemed to relax, opening a narrow but viable passage. After nearly 2 hours of walking, they reached the clearing with the ancient stones. The place seemed different. In daylight, less mysterious but no less powerful. The moss-covered stones formed an almost perfect circle. In the center, the soil was disturbed, as if something had been recently unearthed, probably the spot where Ethan had found the medallion. Clara walked directly to the center of the circle and took the drawing from her pocket. She unfolded it and placed it on the disturbed earth. Then she took the medallion from Ethan's neck and positioned it on the paper. What happened next would defy the logic of any skeptical observer. The medallion began to rotate slowly on the drawing, like a compass finding north. The surrounding stones emitted a faint greenish glow that gradually increased. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly. "What's happening?" asked Mrs. Mitchell, her voice trembling with amazement and reverence. Clara smiled, her eyes again sparkling with that strange golden light. "The Guardians are awakening," she signed. "They're recognizing the call." The tremor increased, not in a frightening way, but rhythmically, like the beats of a giant heart beneath the earth. Suddenly, in the center of the circle, the ground began to sink, forming a circular opening. It wasn't an ordinary hole, excavated by human tools, but a perfectly formed passage as if the earth itself had decided to open up. Rusty was the first to approach the opening. He sniffed the edge and without hesitation jumped inside. Ethan tried to stop him, but it was too late. Frightened for the animal's safety, he approached to look. Instead of the expected darkness, he saw steps of natural stone that descended in a spiral, illuminated by a greenish glow of indefinite origin. "It's the path to the heart of the mountain," explained Clara, already positioning herself to descend. "The Guardians are inviting us." "Wait," signed Ethan, gently holding his daughter's arm. "It could be dangerous." Clara looked at her father with an expression of understanding beyond her age. "More dangerous is letting the man with the false smile find it first," she replied. "He's already digging in the wrong direction, but his instruments detected the energy. Soon he'll correct course." Mrs. Mitchell, who observed everything with a mixture of fear and fascination, made a decision. "I'll go back to the village," she announced. "I need to alert those who still care about the land, and I'll try to delay Arthur somehow." Ethan nodded, grateful for the elder's wisdom. Someone needed to remain in the outside world, ensuring that neither he nor Clara were reported missing again. "Be careful," asked Mrs. Mitchell, hugging first the girl and then Ethan, "and trust the Guardians. They have protected this land for longer than we can imagine." After Mrs. Mitchell's departure, Ethan and Clara finally descended the stone steps. The passage was surprisingly spacious and airy. The greenish glow intensified as they advanced, eliminating the need for the flashlight that Ethan carried. Rusty waited for them at the foot of the spiral staircase, wagging his tail as if he were in familiar territory. Beyond him stretched a natural tunnel, its walls too smooth to have been formed by common erosion. Small crystals embedded in the rock emitted the light that illuminated the path. "The Guardians made these tunnels thousands of years ago," signed Clara, running her hand along the crystalline walls. "They are the paths of the earth." They walked for almost half an hour, the tunnel occasionally branching. At each junction, Clara chose the path without hesitation, as if following a map visible only to her. The air, instead of becoming stale, as would be expected so far below the surface, seemed increasingly pure and invigorating. Finally, the tunnel widened, opening into a spacious and majestic cavern. The ceiling, high and vaulted, was covered with crystals larger than those in the tunnel, creating a subterranean sky of greenish light. Stalactites and stalagmites formed natural columns around the perimeter. But what really captured Ethan's attention was the center of the cavern. There, elevated on a pedestal of natural stone, rested a gem the size of a closed fist. It wasn't a common crystal, nor a recognizable precious stone. It pulsed with its own light, alternating between shades of green, blue, and gold, like a living heart made of pure light. "The heart of the mountain," signed Clara reverently. Ethan approached slowly, mesmerized by the beauty of the object. As he got closer, he could feel its vibration, an ancient and powerful energy that resonated with something deep inside him. Without thinking, he extended his hand. "Don't touch it directly," Clara quickly warned. "No human can withstand its pure power." At that moment, a tremor stronger than the previous ones shook the cavern. Small rock fragments detached from the ceiling. Rusty began to bark, not at them, but toward one of the side tunnels that Ethan hadn't noticed before. "They're coming," signed Clara, her face pale with concern. The machine men found another way. As confirmation of her words, they heard a distant sound of drills and controlled explosions echoing through the tunnels. Arthur Crawford had somehow detected the presence of the heart of the mountain and, was now forcing his way through, destroying millennial tunnels with his invasive technology. "What do we do now?" asked Ethan, suddenly feeling small and powerless in the face of the vastness of what they were confronting. Clara's eyes shone more intensely than ever, her childish face illuminated by an ancestral wisdom. "We have to ask for help from the true guardians of this place," she answered, turning to the center of the cavern. "And they're going to need a spokesperson." The tremors intensified with each minute. Dust and small stones fell from the cavern ceiling while the sound of the machines inexorably approached. Ethan looked around, frantically searching for some escape route, some way to protect his daughter from the imminent destruction. "Don't be afraid, Dad," signed Clara with a disconcerting serenity. "The Guardians won't let anything happen to us." The girl walked to the center of the cavern, where the heart of the mountain pulsed ever faster, as if responding to the external threat. She positioned herself in front of the pedestal and closed her eyes, her small hands extended forward, not touching the luminous gem, but hovering centimeters away from it. Ethan watched, both powerless and amazed at the same time. Rusty stood beside the girl like a sentinel, his eyes fixed on the tunnel entrance from where the threatening sounds came. Suddenly, the medallion around Ethan's neck began to heat up intensely. By instinct, he removed it, holding it by the yay chain. The stone piece vibrated frantically, emitting the same greenish glow that permeated the cavern. "The medallion, Dad," signed Clara, without opening her eyes. "Bring it to me." Ethan approached cautiously, extending the medallion to his daughter. When the piece was a few centimeters from the heart of the mountain, something extraordinary happened. A beam of light connected the two objects, creating a luminous bridge between them. The glow intensified so much that Ethan had to shield his eyes. When he could finally look again, the scene before him defied any rational explanation. The space around Clara was filled with translucent silhouettes, vaguely humanoid forms composed of light and natural elements. Some seemed made of leaves and branches, others of fluid water, still others of living stone. They had no defined faces, but their postures communicated purpose and intelligence. The forest guardians had manifested. Clara was at the center of this circle of entities, her eyes now completely golden, without visible pupil or iris. When she moved her hands, it was no longer in common signs, but in ancient and complex gestures that Ethan had never seen before. His daughter had become a channel, a connection point between worlds. A particularly violent tremor shook the cavern. This time, larger pieces of rock detached from the ceiling. One of them was about to hit Ethan when, inexplicably, it stopped in midair and disintegrated into fine dust. The sounds of excavation were now just a few meters away. Soon the machines would break through the natural wall that separated the artificial tunnels from the ancient paths of the Guardians. The heart of the mountain pulsed ever faster, as if on maximum alert. Clara finally spoke. Her gestures simultaneously translated into words that Ethan, surprisingly, could understand directly in his mind, bypassing his deafness. "They ask you to choose, Dad. The connection needs a human guardian, someone who will serve as a bridge between worlds." The wall of the side tunnel began to crack. Human voices mingled with the noise of heavy machinery. They were about to invade the sanctuary. "What should I do?" asked Ethan, not with signs but in thought, realizing he could be understood. "Accept the role of guardian," replied Clara, her mental voice serene but urgent. "But there is a price. You will have to give up something important." A deafening crash signaled the breaking of the wall. Dust filled the air as the first artificial lights from powerful flashlights cut through the greenish twilight of the cavern. Human silhouettes began to emerge from the dust. "Whatever is necessary," decided Ethan, his heart firm, "to protect you, to protect this land." The luminous entities moved in a circle, faster and faster, creating a whirlwind of light around Clara and Ethan. The newcomers stopped, dumbfounded at the supernatural scene. At the forefront of the invading group was Arthur Crawford. His impeccable suit was now covered in dust, but his expression of ambition remained intact, his eyes immediately fixed on the heart of the mountain. "It's amazing," he exclaimed, completely ignoring the unexplainable. phenomena around him. A bioluminescent crystal of unprecedented size and purity. It must be worth billions. Beside him, technical assistants operated measuring instruments that beeped frantically, recording energy levels beyond their scales. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between the invaders and the heart of the mountain. The luminous entities accompanied his movement, as if recognizing his decision. "You cannot take this from here," said Ethan. "Not in signs, but in audible words, surprising. Even himself. The heart belongs to the mountain, to the forest. It's part of the balance of everything." Arthur widened his eyes, momentarily disconcerted at hearing Ethan speak. "Mr. Walker, but aren't you deaf?" he asked, confused. "I was," replied Ethan, his voice clear and confident, as if he had always spoken. "Now I am the voice of those you cannot hear." Arthur quickly recovered from the initial shock, his greed overcoming the fear of the inexplicable. "This is absurd. We have all the necessary authorizations. This crystal is a natural resource on lands we have already legally acquired. Step aside." He made a gesture for his men to advance. Two of them, using portable excavation equipment, stepped forward. That's when Rusty, until then silent, emitted a growl that didn't seem to come just from him, but echoed from all directions of the cavern. Simultaneously, the luminous entities expanded, their translucent forms growing until they touched the ceiling of the cavern. The ground trembled violently, this time not from the machines but as a direct response to the invading presence. "Last chance," warned Ethan, his voice amplified by dozens of other ethereal voices that joined his. "Leave. Now, leave the heart in peace." Arthur hesitated, finally affected by the supernatural spectacle. He looked at Clara, who remained at the center of the luminous whirlwind, her golden eyes fixed on him, penetrating and ancient. "You don't understand," he argued, a subtle tremor in his previously confident voice. "This crystal could revolutionize medicine, technology. We can change the world with it." "It already changes the world," replied Ethan. "It's what keeps the waters pure, the forest alive, the air clean. If you remove it from here, you'll destroy not just Pine Ridge Reserve, but the balance of the entire region." One of the technicians nervously approached Arthur, showing him the readings on his device. "Sir, these energy levels are increasing exponentially. It's not safe to continue here. The cavern could collapse." As if to confirm his warning, a wide fissure opened in the ceiling, followed by a deep rumble that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. Fear finally overcame greed in Arthur's face. "Retreat, everyone!" "Out now," he ordered, already turning toward the exit. His men didn't need a second warning. In seconds, the cavern was empty again, except for Ethan, Clara, Rusty, and the luminous entities. The tremor gradually diminished, the fissures in the ceiling stopped expanding. Clara finally lowered her hands, her eyes returning to normal. The entities around began to diminish, their outlines becoming more diffuse. "They're gone for now," said the girl, using her physical voice for the first time since the beginning of the event. "But they'll be back." Ethan approached his daughter, still amazed at his newly acquired ability to speak and hear. "How is this possible?" he asked, hearing his own voice clearly for the first time in decades. "The Guardians lifted the veil of silence," explained Clara. "They needed you to be their voice in the world of men. But the gift is not permanent, Dad." Ethan instantly understood. This was the price mentioned. The ability to hear and speak was temporary, a loan, so that he could fulfill his role as defender of the heart of the mountain. "For how long?" he asked, though he already knew that the duration didn't matter. He would accept any condition to protect what was truly important. "Until the danger passes. Until the man with the false smile understands that he cannot take what doesn't belong to him." The luminous entities had almost disappeared, leaving only ghostly impressions in peripheral vision. The heart of the mountain, however, continued, pulsing, its rhythm now calmer, stable. Ethan took Clara's hand. Together, with Rusty by their side, they turned to the tunnel through which they had entered, ready to return to the surface and face what would come next. "It's not over, is it?" asked Ethan. "No," confirmed Clara, her maturity momentarily replaced by childlike vulnerability. The real challenge is just beginning. The man with the false smile has resources that the Guardians don't fully understand. Then we'll have to be smarter, decided Ethan, affectionately squeezing his daughter's hand. And together, we'll protect what really matters. Pinecrest Valley awoke divided. On one side, residents who believed in the promises of prosperity brought by Arthur Crawford. On the other, those who, led by Mrs. Mitchell, defended the preservation of the reserve and respected the mysteries of the forest. In the central square, a true battle of words was unfolding. Arthur, impeccable even after the events in the cavern, eloquently discoursed about jobs, development, and the spectacular crystal that would be the great tourist attraction of his resort. Just imagine, he was saying, visitors from all over the world coming to see this marvel of nature. The small Pinecrest Valley transformed on the map of world ecotourism. Many applauded, seduced by the vision of a prosperous future. Others, however, listened with distrust, especially after Mrs. Mitchell's accounts of the strange occurrences in the forest. The tension in the air was palpable when Ethan appeared at the edge of the square, hand in hand with Clara. Rusty followed them, vigilant as always. A murmur ran through the crowd, the deaf farmer who could now hear and speak. The stories had already spread, growing in fantastic details with each retelling. Arthur interrupted his speech upon seeing them. A flash of uncertainty crossed his face before he could recompose his mask of confidence. "Ah, Mr. Walker, just who I wanted to see," he greeted, approaching with a studied smile. "We were discussing how we could integrate your property into the project in a way that benefits everyone." Ethan advanced, his expression serene but determined. When he spoke, his voice resonated clearly across the square, surprising those who had known him for years as the silent farmer. "There will be no project, Mr. Crawford," he declared. "The heart of the mountain will remain where it has always been, protected by its true guardians." Arthur laughed, trying to diminish the impact of Ethan's words. "I understand your concern, but I guarantee we will extract the crystal with all care. Our specialists have developed a method that—" "You don't understand," interrupted Ethan. "It's not a question of method. That crystal is not a resource to be exploited. It's a vital part of this land, as essential as the soil under our feet or the air we breathe." The crowd fell silent, divided between skepticism and reverence. Mrs. Mitchell approached, positioning herself beside Ethan as an ally. "Listen to what he says," asked the elder. "Some things have no price, cannot be bought or sold. The ancient wisdom of our ancestors has always taught us to respect the limits of nature." Arthur realized he was losing ground. His expression hardened, the mask of benefactor beginning to fall. "With all due respect, we are in the 21st century. We cannot base economic decisions on superstitions and folk legends." It was Clara who responded, her childish voice carrying a depth that silenced even the most skeptical. "It's not superstition, it's knowledge that you forgot." The girl released her father's hand and walked to the center of the square. The medallion, now hanging from her small neck, began to glow faintly under the sunlight. Without warning, Rusty howled, a long and melancholic sound that seemed to summon something beyond human comprehension. The sky, until then clear, suddenly darkened. Clouds formed in spirals above the village, slowly rotating in a pattern that echoed Clara's drawings. A strong wind blew through the square, carrying leaves and small branches that danced in the air as if they had lives of their own. "What the hell is happening?" murmured one of Arthur's assistants, grabbing documents that threatened to fly away in the wind. The businessman remained impassive, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his growing nervousness. He faced Ethan with a mixture of anger and incomprehension. "You really think some atmospheric tricks will stop me? I have powerful investors, government authorizations, cutting-edge technology." "And we have something much older and more powerful," replied Ethan calmly. "The truth." With these words, he took from his pocket a small metal device, the same one he had found buried on his property days before. Beside it, he placed documents that Mrs. Mitchell had collected during the previous night. "Your men planted toxic substances on my land, trying to kill the vegetation to facilitate your purchase," explained Ethan, his voice amplified by the attentive silence of the crowd. And these documents show that your project was never approved by the State Environmental Agency. The licenses are forged." A murmur of indignation ran through the square. Arthur visibly paled, his eyes darting from the documents to the now hostile faces around him. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "My assistants must have made some administrative error. As for the device, I've never seen it before." "We also know about the illegal excavations," continued Ethan, "digging tunnels in a protected reserve, using unauthorized explosives, putting endangered species at risk." By this point, several residents who had previously supported Arthur began to distance themselves from him, joining Ethan and Mrs. Mitchell's side. The businessman, realizing he was losing his audience, decided to change tactics. "Even if there were irregularities," he admitted calculatedly, "think of the greater benefit. This village will continue in poverty without investments like mine. Do you prefer to protect a crystal that no one has ever seen to ensuring the future of your families?" His argument found some resonance. The dilemma between preservation and economic development was real and palpable for many present there. That's when Clara took another step forward. Her eyes shone with that strange golden light, visible even in the daylight. She extended her hands, the medallion on her chest pulsing in sync with something invisible. "We don't need to choose," she said, her voice echoing in an impossible way for a 6-year-old child. "The forest has always provided for those who respect it. The guardians are willing to show new paths." As if responding to her words, the wind changed. Now, instead of chaotic, it blew in a specific direction, carrying seeds and small flowers that had never been seen in the region. Where they touched the ground, small green shoots immediately appeared, growing visibly. "Medicinal plants," identified Mrs. Mitchell, amazed. "Some that I knew only from stories of my grandparents, herbs that cure diseases that modern medicine barely understands." Other manifestations began to occur. Unknown fruit sprouted on trees that normally wouldn't produce them. Butterflies, with bright wings, species never documented, appeared in droves. The very earth seemed to awaken, rejuvenated by an invisible energy. "The gifts of the guardians," explained Clara. "They have always shared with those who respect the limits. The real treasure is not buried in the mountain. It's all around us, growing, living." The residents observed in reverent silence. Even the most skeptical couldn't deny what their eyes witnessed. An elderly woman extended her hand to touch one of the newly emerged plants and exclaimed that her articular pain, chronic for years, had instantly diminished. Arthur Crawford watched, his empire of promises crumbling with each new wonder that emerged. His face alternated between anger and disbelief. Finally, in a desperate gesture, he advanced toward Clara. "Enough of this charade, none of this is real." Before he could reach the girl, Rusty intercepted him with a threatening growl. Simultaneously, the ground beneath his feet trembled violently, opening a small fissure between him and Clara. "The earth speaks, Mr. Crawford," said Ethan, approaching. "It just uses a language that you've forgotten how to listen to." Confronted with the inexplicable and abandoned by his followers, Arthur finally retreated. His empire of ambition, built on lies and manipulation, was disintegrating in the face of a force older and truer than any material wealth. "This isn't over," he threatened while his assistants hastily collected their equipment. "I have connections, resources. I'll come back with inspectors, scientists, people who will see through this collective illusion." "You can come back," replied Ethan serenely, "but the land will be waiting, and this time it won't be so gentle in its warning." With these words, thunder echoed in the mountains. Though there was no storm in sight, Arthur visibly shuddered, his arrogance finally giving way to the primitive fear that all humans feel in the face of the forces of nature in their full magnitude. Without further words, he and his men hastily withdrew, leaving behind only the dust of their frustrated ambitions. Pinecrest Valley had chosen its path, not one of unbridled exploitation masked as progress, but of respectful partnership with the land that had sustained them for generations. As he watched Arthur's vehicles moving away down the dusty road, Ethan noticed something strange. The sounds around him were beginning to become muffled, distant. The temporary gift that the guardians had granted him was dissipating. He looked at Clara, who observed him with understanding beyond her age. She held his hand and signed, returning to the language they had always shared. "It's not over, Dad. He's going to try one last card." 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the square. Pinecrest Valley was experiencing a moment of profound transformation. The medicinal plants that had sprouted miraculously continued to grow, and Mrs. Mitchell, with her ancestral knowledge, taught the residents about their healing properties. Stories of inexplicable cures began to spread. A child with chronic asthma breathed freely for the first time. An elderly man who could barely walk now traversed the forest trails with renewed vigor. Ethan's farm had become the epicenter of this green revolution. His lands, always fertile, now produced with almost supernatural abundance. Larger fruits, more vibrant vegetables, flowers of colors never seen before. People from neighboring villages began to arrive, attracted by rumors of inexplicable wonders. Ethan, though once again immersed in the silence of his deafness, felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The connection established with the guardians remained not through words, but through sensations and intuitions that guided him in his daily work. Clara, by his side, flourished in her new role as an interpreter between worlds, her drawings increasingly complex and precise, revealing aspects of the forest that not even the most experienced woodsman knew. That sunny afternoon, Mrs. Mitchell arrived at the farm carrying an old book, bound in leather worn by time. She found Ethan and Clara in the orchard, picking golden apples, a variety that had never existed there before. "I found this among my grandmother's things," she signed, to Ethan. "These are records of the ancient inhabitants of these lands, even prior to colonization. They speak about the guardians and about cycles of renewal that occur every many generations." The book contained illustrations that astonishingly resembled Clara's drawings, the same spiral symbols, the same representations of the heart of the mountain. Some pages described rituals of communion with the earth, ceremonies to thank for the gifts received and maintain the natural balance. "We need to perform the Thanksgiving ritual," signed Clara after carefully examining the book. "To seal the pact with the guardians." Mrs. Mitchell nodded gravely. According to the notes, the ritual should be performed at the next full moon in the clearing with the ancient stones. It required the presence of the chosen ones, those who had been directly touched by the guardians, and offerings of the fruits of the earth. Preparations began immediately. News of the ritual spread throughout the village, generating both enthusiasm and skepticism. Many had witnessed the extraordinary events, but others, especially those who weren't present in the square on that decisive day, maintained their doubts. Meanwhile, in the nearest town, Arthur Crawford hadn't given up. In a meeting room on the top floor of a luxury hotel, he was presenting his new plan to investors and government representatives. "The scientific value surpasses any conventional environmental consideration," he argued, showing images of the heart of the mountain captured clandestinely. "We're talking about a potentially revolutionary energy source. Imagine, clean, self-sustainable energy, independent of fossil fuels." One of those present, an internationally renowned scientist, observed the images with barely disguised fascination. "If these readings are correct," he commented, adjusting his thin-framed glasses, "we're facing something completely new to science. But the extraction will be minimally invasive," completed Arthur, his confident smile back on his face. "We've developed a method that will allow removing the crystal without permanently damaging its surroundings." What Arthur didn't reveal was his true plan, a quick and secretive operation scheduled precisely for the night of the next full moon, when, according to his infiltrated informants in the village, the residents would be distracted with their folkloric ritual. On the morning before the full moon, Ethan woke up with a strange sensation. Something vibrated in the air, an almost electrical tension. Rusty was restless, walking in circles on the porch, occasionally looking toward the forest with his ears alert. Clara, upon waking, immediately ran to her desk and began to draw frantically. What appeared on the paper made Ethan pale. Excavator machines, armed men, the heart of the mountain being ripped from its natural pedestal, and blood, the first truly violent element to appear in the girl's drawings. "They're coming tonight," she signed, her eyes teary. "They want to steal the heart while we give thanks." Ethan immediately convened an emergency meeting. Mrs. Mitchell, Jack, and other residents who had become allies quickly arrived at the farm. Clara's drawing was examined with concern. "We need to alert the authorities," suggested Jack. "The reserve is protected by federal law." "The law won't deter men like Arthur Crawford," replied Mrs. Mitchell, her aged face tense with worry. "He has enough money to circumvent any legal obstacle." "Then we'll fight," declared another resident, a young farmer named Paul. "We'll defend the forest ourselves." Ethan shook his head emphatically. Direct confrontation was not the way. Lives could be lost, including those of innocents who were just following orders without understanding the true significance of what they were facing. "The Guardians," he signed, turning to Clara. "Can they help us?" The girl closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to distant voices. When she opened them again, there was determination in her childish gaze. "They say the ritual still needs to be performed, but not in the clearing, in the heart." The plan formed quickly. While a group of residents would ostentatiously prepare everything for the ritual in the clearing with the ancient stones, attracting the attention of any of Arthur's spies, Ethan, Clara, Mrs. Mitchell, and a few chosen ones would secretly go to the cavern of the heart of the mountain. The afternoon fell, and with it came the full moon, enormous and bright on the horizon. The visible preparations for the ritual attracted practically the entire village, creating an atmosphere of celebration. Bonfires were lit, traditional music played, dances begun. To an external observer, it would be impossible to distinguish who would actually participate in the true ritual. Under this cloak of festivity, Ethan and his small group slipped silently into the forest. Rusty led the way, his sharpened senses alert for any danger. The medallion around Clara's neck pulsed with its own light, illuminating the path better than any flashlight. They reached the secret entrance, the same circular opening through which they had descended days before. Surprisingly, it was unobstructed and accessible, as if the earth itself invited them to enter. The subterranean tunnels seemed different now, more alive somehow. The crystalline walls pulsed with rhythmic light like heartbeats. The air was laden with a sweet and invigorating aroma, a mixture of fresh flowers and moist earth. Upon reaching the main chamber, they found the heart of the mountain pulsing more intensely than ever, alternating between shades of deep blue and vibrant green. Clara approached reverently, guiding the small group to form a circle around the crystalline pedestal. "The ritual should begin when the moon is directly above the mountain," she signed, consulting the ancient book that Mrs. Mitchell had brought. They positioned the offerings, fruits, flowers, medicinal herbs, all produced on the blessed lands, at specific points in the circle. Clara guided each participant on the gestures and words they should intone, taught to her by the guardians themselves. The cue moment approached. The energy in the cavern intensified with each minute. Small lights, similar to golden fireflies, began to appear at the edges of the cavern, dancing through the air in complex patterns. That's when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery muffled by the rock, but rapidly approaching. "They're coming through the side tunnel," warned Jack, the youngest of the group with the sharpest hearing, the same one they used last time. Ethan exchanged a significant look with Clara. There was no time for hesitation. The ritual needed to begin immediately, regardless of the moon's position. The girl nodded, understanding. She positioned herself in front of the heart of the mountain and raised the medallion, which now shone almost blindingly. She began to intone an ancient melody, words in a language that no one else there knew, but that everyone somehow understood at a level deeper than intellectual. The other participants joined in, repeating the gestures and sounds that Clara had taught. The heart of the mountain responded, its pulse accelerating, its light expanding to encompass the entire circle. The sounds of excavation dangerously approached. Dust and small rock fragments began to fall from one of the cavern walls, indicating they were about to break through it. At the height of the ritual, when the participants' voices reached a harmonious crescendo, something extraordinary happened. The heart of the mountain emitted a pulse of energy that expanded like a wave, passing through those present without causing harm. The golden lights multiplied exponentially, filling every inch of the cavern. And then the entities themselves manifested, the guardians, in all their ethereal glory. Dozens of them, luminous forms that merged natural elements into vaguely humanoid silhouettes, appeared around the circle, joining the ritual. At the exact moment when the side wall finally gave way and Arthur Crawford's men burst into the cavern, armed and accompanied by extraction equipment, a complete transformation was already underway. The heart of the mountain rose from its pedestal, floating meters above the ground. The luminous entities spun around it at increasing speed, creating a vortex of light that distorted the very perception of space. Arthur, at the forefront of the invading group, froze at the supernatural vision. His face, normally controlled, dissolved into a mask of terror and fascination. "What the hell is this?" he murmured, unable to look away. One of the technicians accompanying him tried to use a measuring device, which immediately overloaded and exploded in his hands. "Sir, these energy levels are impossible," stammered another assistant. "Nothing in our scientific record." "Shut up," ordered Arthur, his ambition momentarily overcoming fear. "Prepare the extractor. We have a unique window of opportunity." That's when Ethan stepped forward, separating from the ritual circle. Surprisingly, when he spoke, his voice returned, not just audible but amplified by the natural acoustics of the cavern. "There is no more opportunity, Arthur Crawford. The cycle completes today." The businessman faced Ethan with barely contained hatred. "You and your primitive superstitions won't impede progress. This crystal belongs to humanity, to science." "You are mistaken," replied Ethan calmly. "The heart doesn't belong to anyone. We belong to it." At that moment, the light vortex reached its apex. The heart of the mountain emitted a final pulse, more powerful than all the previous ones. A wave of energy expanded in all directions, passing through rocks, earth, and everyone present. Arthur and his men were thrown back by the invisible force. Their equipment shut down instantly, some melting as if exposed to extreme heat. The tunnel through which they had entered began to collapse, rocks falling and blocking the passage. When finally the light diminished to a level that allowed seeing again, a fundamental transformation had occurred. The heart of the mountain was no longer in its concentrated crystalline form. Instead, it had fragmented into thousands of small luminous particles that now permeated the entire cavern, embedding themselves in the walls, ceiling, floor, like stars in a subterranean sky. "It dispersed," signed Clara, amazed. "It spread to protect itself and the forest." Arthur looked around in despair, his great prize now literally diluted beyond any possibility of extraction. "No, this can't—" He was interrupted by a tremor stronger than the previous ones. Large fissures opened in the cavern floor. Crystalline water began to gush through them, quickly forming small streams that grew with each second. "The cavern is flooding!" shouted one of Arthur's assistants. "We need to get out now." Ethan and his group exchanged alarmed looks. Their entrance tunnel remained intact, but how would they reach it with the water rapidly rising? That's when the luminous entities, still present though less distinct, moved in formation, creating an elevated path, a bridge of solid light over the rising water. Clara was the first to understand, guiding the group to this safe path. "Quick, this way," she called. Arthur and his men, seeing the water rise ever faster and their own tunnel completely blocked, had no choice but to follow the same path. The entities allowed their passage, though with visible reluctance in the way the light bridge trembled under their feet. Everyone managed to escape the flooded cavern, emerging through the circular entrance into the night forest. The full moon bathed the landscape with its silver light, now complemented by a greenish glow that emanated from the soil itself. Arthur, drenched and defeated, faced Ethan with a mixture of anger and incomprehension. "You have no idea what you destroyed today," he accused. "The scientific potential, the technological possibilities." "Nothing was destroyed," replied Ethan, his voice already beginning to fail, the temporary gift dissipating again. "The heart merely changed form, Now it's everywhere instead of concentrated where it could be exploited and removed. As if to confirm his words, small points of light began to appear throughout the surrounding forest, in the leaves of trees, in dewdrops on flowers, in the fur of animals that cautiously observed the scene. The energy of the heart of the mountain had spread, becoming an integral part of the entire ecosystem. "It's over, Arthur," said Mrs. Mitchell, her elderly face serene in the face of the wonder she was witnessing. "Go away and don't come back. This land is not for you." Arthur's assistants and technicians were already moving away, murmuring among themselves, clearly shaken by what they had witnessed. Some looked back with expressions of amazement and regret, as if understanding for the first time the true magnitude of what they had tried to disturb. Arthur, isolated in his obstinacy, made one last desperate attempt. "You can't stop me. I'll return with more men, more equipment. I'll find a way to extract this energy, even dispersed." Clara approached him, her childish eyes shining with ancient wisdom. "The Guardians say you're free to try," she said simply. "But they warn that each time you return with exploitative intentions, the forest will respond with more force. Today was just a gentle warning." Something in the girl's voice, or perhaps in the way the lights around seemed to intensify in response to her words, finally penetrated Arthur's armor of greed. For the first time, a flash of genuine doubt crossed his face. Without further words, he turned and left, following his men along the trail that led back to the village. In the days that followed, the transformation of Pinecrest Valley accelerated. The dissolution of the heart of the mountain resulted in an unprecedented flourishing. The water that had gushed from the cavern formed new streams and small waterfalls, all with healing properties. The vegetation grew with renewed vigor, producing food in abundance. Researchers, healers, and spiritual pilgrims began to arrive, attracted by reports of natural wonders and inexplicable cures. But unlike the exploitative tourism that Arthur had planned, these visitors came with respect and reverence. Mrs. Mitchell, with the help of other elders from the region, established a council of human guardians to protect the reserve and educate visitors. They created strict rules. Nothing could be removed from the forest, no plant could be harvested without permission and proper ritual, no permanent construction would be allowed beyond the already established limits. Ethan, though once again silent in his world without sounds, found a new form of communication. The connection established with the Guardians remained, now manifesting through his extraordinary ability to cultivate the land. Under his care, the farm became a model of sustainable agriculture, inspiring neighboring communities to adopt similar practices. As for Clara, she grew as a bridge between worlds. Her drawings became living maps of the forest, revealing safe paths, places of power, areas that needed healing. The luminous entities continued to visit her, less frequently than before, but always present in important moments. Rusty remained her constant companion, aging with dignity, his amber eyes always alert, always wise. The bond between the girl and the animal deepened with time, becoming almost symbiotic in their mutual understanding. On a tranquil afternoon, 5 years after the events that transformed the village, Ethan observed from his porch the verdant valley that stretched below. Clara, now 11 years old, sat beside him with Rusty at her feet, drawing with the same intense concentration as always. "Dad," she signed, raising her eyes from her drawing, "the Guardians showed me something today. They say other places will. Need our help soon, other forests, other mountains, other hearts." Ethan smiled, understanding what she meant. The connection they had established with the earth, the wisdom they had helped preserve, all of this could not remain isolated in their small village. The world out there, increasingly unbalanced, would need people who still knew how to listen to the voice of the earth. "Are we ready?" he asked in signs. Clara nodded, her eyes momentarily sparkling with that golden glow that had never completely left her. "The forest is everywhere," she replied. "We just need to teach people to see it again." As the sun set over Pinecrest Valley, small points of light began to appear among the trees, the dispersed fragments of the heart of the mountain, now an inseparable part of the web of life. And with them, translucent silhouettes moved gracefully, invisible too, most, but always present. The forest guardians continued their eternal work, now with new allies among humans. The balance had been restored, at least for now, and although challenges would certainly come, ancient wisdom finally began to echo, again in the modern world, like seeds carried by the wind, ready to germinate wherever they found fertile soil.